This video is part one of a four-part series outlining a phenomenon called drift, which has led to the failure of many organizations. But the danger with drift is, unless you're looking for it, you don't even know it's happening. So in this video, I'll outline what is drift, why it happens, to assist you and your board in recognizing some of the factors that lead to drift, and therefore be in a better position to have a more informed discussion with your peers, your executive, your health and safety professional around how your board can monitor for early warning signs, or at least have enough knowledge to probe in the right areas and ask better questions. I'm Samantha McGolrick, and welcome to our little corner of the internet where I help purpose-driven board members drive systemic change and make a positive impact on the health, happiness, and resilience of society. In stories of drift, organizations fail precisely because they're doing well, but their measure of well is based on a narrow range of performance criteria, which is often what the organization gets rewarded on in its current political, economic, or commercial environment. When an organization drifts toward failure, accidents can happen without anything breaking, without anybody erring, without anybody breaking the rules that they consider relevant. And seeing holes and deficiencies in hindsight won't explain why particular actions and behaviors existed that way over time and were rationalized as normal. And it doesn't help predict or prevent a future drift into failure. In the words of safety researcher Sidney Decker, drifting into failure is a slow, incremental process. An organization using all its resources in pursuit of its mandate, for example, to provide safe air travel or deliver electricity reliably, will gradually borrow more and more from the margins that once buffered it from assumed boundaries of failure. The very pursuit of the organization's mandate over time and under the pressure of various environmental factors, most prominently competition and scarcity, dictates that it does this borrowing. The organization needs to be more efficient, do more with less, perhaps take greater risks. In its very pursuit of the mandate that creates the conditions for the eventual collapse. The bright side inevitably brews the dark side, given enough time and enough uncertainty. All organizations will exhibit this behavior. In stories of drift, local decisions that made sense at the time cumulatively become a set of socially organized circumstances and norms that make the system more likely to produce a harmful outcome. So when we're trying to understand why or how drift has occurred, we want to ensure our efforts are focused on understanding what made sense to the decision makers at the time. Why were their decisions, one or many, thought of as normal? Why did nothing flag as report-worthy? With this in mind, let's take a look at what influences our decisions at a local level, and we'll start with eliminating the idea that any one of us makes a rational decision, because in complex socio-technical systems of which we all work in, each person in the system does not have access to all the information they need to make a truly rational decision. At least that's according to classical decision-making theory or the rational choice theory. Now, this theory is the cornerstone of decades of decision-making research. It says that decision makers are seen as rational actors, and that is, we make choices based on logical analysis of all the available options. However, having all of the information in a complex system is literally impossible. I mean, we're lucky if we're able to understand or have all the information we need in our local setting, let alone in the entire system. And not to mention, we make many of our decisions based on emotions that are driven by our perception of our environment. For example, we'll make a decision based on how safe or secure we feel. An example is fight or flight. Do we flee or stick it out? We determine that based on how safe we feel. Another example is how our need to feel accepted by people will influence our behavior. Think about your kids or you as a young person. We make really bad decisions and potentially hurt others to belong to a group. You might find your kid is called a bully, and while that might make you feel like your kid is a bad person, it's really just an example of your child making decisions based on the emotions they're feeling. Because when we don't feel safe or secure, that stress or strain we feel not only impacts our behavior, but it impacts our nervous system. An example is stress. It influences our behavior and our physical and mental health. Our values, assumptions, and belief also influence our behavior. You get the picture. We are complex creatures, and because of this, how work gets done should never be thought of as simple. So out of dissatisfaction with the rational choice theory, which, to summarize, assumes we have access to all the information we need to make the right decisions, and that humans are pretty simple creatures who are not influenced by our environment or our emotions, came the local rationality principle. And this theory suggests that people will do what makes sense given the situational indications, the operational pressures, and organizational norms that exist at the time. That is, we will take our paradigms, our world or worldview, which are informed by our our knowledge, our values, our history, and our biases, we'll reflect on our goals, which are often muddled because we're constantly needing to address conflicting goals in any organization, and we'll take what we're focusing on or what we're distracted by, what's occupying our attention. For example, we might be upset that management didn't give us the resources we requested, and now we have an issue that would not have happened had we had those resources. Or we might be thinking we need to rush this job through because we have targets or incentives that need to be met. And finally, we'll consider the nature of the data available to us at the time, and that is what's actually happening right now around us. And then we'll try and find a solution that makes sense based on all of this. And this is called the local rationality principle. And while many of you may agree that sounds a lot more logical than the rational choice theory, it happens to be where drift begins. Because locally sensible decisions about balancing safety and productivity, once made and successfully repeated, success being no incidents, can eventually grow into unreflective, routine, taken for granted scripts that become part of our worldview. And this worldview can infiltrate people all over the organization and how they make their decisions. It can become the organizational culture, not just a local subculture. So this is why normal everyday performance is not what is prescribed by rules and regulation. It's more what takes place as a result of the adjustments we make, which we call work as done. Rules therefore become less important in informing our action, whereas task demands and environmental changes become more important. And it's also why it's important for board members to understand where and how the board influences people's perception of priorities. Work as done is characterized by the kinds of adjustments, the adaptations, the variations, the trade-offs, the compromises, and workarounds that are hard to prescribe and hard to see from afar, but can become accepted and unremarkable from the inside. Mostly, such variability is deliberate, but sometimes it's unintended. Pioneering safety researcher Jens Rasmussen illustrated these competing priorities and constraints that affect all socio-technical systems in his migration model. The model shows that operations are constantly trying to balance profitability, safety, and resources, more specifically that workers' workload is feasible. These days, we'd certainly add mental health into that safety category. There's no way around these constraints. There's only room for maneuvering inside the space. The pressure and constraints play out like this. The competitive environment encourages us to focus on short-term financial success and survival, rather than on long-term value criteria, including safety. Workers will also continue to seek to maximize efficiency of their work, and part of that it will be to reduce their workload. And this is even more encouraged by conflicting organizational goals that promote cheaper, faster, better. Now, these pressures push work to migrate towards the limits of acceptable safe performance, and incidents occur when the system's activity crosses over that boundary into unacceptable safety. The problem is, the boundary of safe performance is rarely easy to define before an accident, and it can move over time due to changes in the organization. Rasmussen called this drift towards danger, where the systemic migration of organizational behavior toward an accident will happen under the influence of pressure toward cost effectiveness in an aggressive competing environment. From the inside, decisions look normal, and making trade-offs in the direction of greater efficiency is nothing unusual. In fact, many organizations reward it, and efficiency is also seen as an adaptive response to scarce resources in production. But these trade-offs lead to departures from the norm becoming the norm. Seen from the inside, deviations become compliant behavior. It becomes the new paradigm for those in the organization as to how work is done. It should therefore be no surprise that the trade-offs that people are making in the system are not necessarily done consciously. In fact, these influences gradually become pre-rational, or norms that we take for granted and we bring to our work with us. The problem with drift is that it's difficult to see until it's already happened. Drift tends to be a slow process with the multiple steps that occur over an extended period, where each step is usually small enough that it can go unnoticed with no significant problems until it's too late, which is why deviances are not report-worthy and everything seems normal. This is referred to as an incubation period, where latent or dormant hazards accumulate. Drift is a paradigm shift because there's a tendency to think that when the organization experiences failure, that something must be broken. But the reality is that drift does not happen because of people's lack of attention or knowledge. Drift is a natural phenomenon that affects all types of organizations. People are complying with the emerging local ways to accommodate multiple organizational goals. In part 2 of this series, I'll walk you through the first of 3 ingredients to the local rationality principle, or simply put, how people make sense of things, and some governance tips. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you click that subscribe button to help my content rise to the top so that others can enjoy it as well.